After it was clear to Soviet planners that they had a seriously competitive aircraft on their hands with the Su-27, work started in 1986 to extend the plane's range and add some expanded multi-role capabilities. The two-seat trainer version of the jet was used as the baseline for the project and reworked into the Su-27PU. Well, as the economy of the Soviet Union cooled off in the late 1980s, the budget for the project never hit its targets, and the work ended up proceeding very slowly compared to what Sukhoi had been used to. Only a small number of pre-production aircraft and prototypes were built in between 1987 and 1992, with multiple sources saying that it was only a low single-digit production run, meant more to validate the concept for further development rather than to actually fill out a combat squadron. Well, along with a large number of other defense projects, the funding basically vanished after the collapse of the Soviet Union, and most of the development work either stopped entirely or was continued below a bare-bones level. However, the Su-27PU design was generally capable, met most of its requirements, and was considered pretty much ready for mass production. When foreign customers wanted some upgraded models of the Su-27, the PU was used as the basis for some of those projects, and under the designation Su-30, the plane proved fairly successful on the export market, with about a dozen current and potential operators. Malaysia and India especially were very enthusiastic. Eventually, the Russian Air Force ordered a version for domestic use under the Su-30SM designation with a whole list of upgraded systems, but due to financial constraints, production was at a comparably low rate, with the first few examples only entering service in 2018. The exact number in Russian service isn't easy to verify, and some sources say that it's as few as 50 models, but others claim that it's as high as 200. What we get in War Thunder is the Su-30SM, a jet fighter in rank 8 of the Soviet tech tree at battle rating 14.0 for air and 12.7 for ground. The plane gets a full ballistics computer, an EEGS, helmet-mounted sight, and a modernized radar warning receiver that's a significant upgrade over the Soviet lineage models on earlier flankers. Its radar is the N011M, which is another huge upgrade. It's got basically every advanced radar mode in the game, good tracking, along with the new NCTR feature, which stands for Non-Cooperative Threat Recognition. It's not 100% perfectly accurate, but it tells you above the radar tracking square exactly what you have targeted. For loadouts, this jet gets an unprecedented quantity of air-to-air missiles, along with a targeting pod and basically every high-tier air-to-ground weapon in the Soviet tech tree. For air-to-air missiles, your primary dogfight weapon is the R-73, which you're probably familiar with by now. This is arguably the best IR dogfight missile in the game as of making this review. You also get both versions of the R-27E. These are still relevant, especially before you've spaded the jet, and the R-27ER remains quite deadly even up at the top tier thanks to its impressive speed. Your active radar missile is the R-77-1. This is an upgrade over the basic R-77 that has a stronger rocket booster with far better range on paper. More about that later. For air-to-ground ordnance, it would take too long to go over all of the options, but there are a couple of standouts. The CAB 1500 LG is an enormous laser-guided bomb, and if you prefer laser-guided weapons, this might be a serious go-to for you thanks to its huge warhead that can blow up ground targets dozens of meters away if it's got a clear impact. The KH-38MT also remains an incredibly effective fire-and-forget weapon, with infrared and inertial tracking making it deadly at long range, but it'll usually need a direct hit in order to pop a target. When it comes to flight performance, this jet adds a new dimension to the Soviet air tree. Like, literally a new dimension, as it's got thrust vectoring. As of making this review, the thrust vectoring is on automatic control, and unfortunately you can't do any manual adjustments, but it still provides a little extra controllability in low energy states or post-stall maneuvering. In particular, it lets you pull maneuvers like the Culbit when combined with the new button to disable the AOA limiter. But the combat utility of airshow stunts like that is very situational. Maybe you can get lucky and find an opportunity to make it work, but don't expect miracles, as that stuff usually leaves you out of energy and an incredibly easy target, especially for third-party shots. With that out of the way, the Su-30 still retains excellent overall agility as long as you can keep the speed up and avoid running out of energy in tighter maneuvers. It's also still a big and heavy jet, but if you've flown the earlier flankers before it in the tech tree, it won't really be much of an adjustment to get used to. The acceleration isn't the best, but it's got a very high maximum speed even at low altitude, which lets you outrun, or run down, a good chunk of your opponents even at the top tier. Bringing this jet into air battles kind of exacerbates a lot of problems with the AirRB game mode. It's beyond the scope of an individual aircraft review, but with the current top-tier meta being insane, high-paced, sensory overloaded chaos, the Su-30SM actually gives you some useful tools. I really hate what I'm about to say here, but I had the most success with this jet using its insane quantity of R-77-1s to perform really aggressive pushes to close the distance for kill shots. Since you've got 12 of them, plus the 2 R-73s, you can afford more throwaway shots. You can see in some of the clips I included that I sometimes used 2 or 3 shots on an opponent just to keep the pressure up and force them to stay defensive, even if most of the shots missed. It didn't matter, and by spamming out the missiles, I was able to position for kill shots easier than I would have been able to in a lot of other top-tier jets in a similar sort of engagement. Another silver lining is that since you have so many missiles, you can double-tap targets to prevent kill steals. I included a couple of clips where I fired an extra missile at someone who I had already hit but hadn't J'd out yet, just to make sure that I got the credit and none of my friends came along to steal the kill. Again, I hate that this is a consideration, but it is, and the Su-30 can mitigate it to a degree. The other thing I want to mention for air combat is the range on the R-77-1. This thing will give you tone and let you fire at super long range, like out over 70 kilometers in a head-on, and when you see the Wes on your radar scope, it might be tempting to ripple them off near the start of the match and hope to get lucky. Don't. 99% of those long-range yeet shots are gonna miss. As of making this review, the R-77-1 has massive wobble problems like the Mica, and its range drops off big time after you launch it due to excessive energy bleed during the boost phase with those grid fins. They might fix that at some point, but for now, try to fire them within about 20 to 25 kilometers for shots that you actually want to score hits with. In terms of ground attack, this thing can be a beast in close air support. No matter what your playstyle, this thing has the weapons that you need. As mentioned earlier, my personal preference is either the CAB 1500 LGBs or the KH-38 MT missiles. Very strong performer out over a ground battle, both for close air support and for providing fighter cover. Visually, the Su-30SM is still a great looking jet, even though the double cockpit is a little odd from some angles. The default blue camo is nice, but my preference is the solid black one that you see me using in the vid. No obvious issues on the 3D model, but I believe the afterburners should have a little bit more of a blue tint on them near the nozzle, a minor gripe. Landing this jet is just like the other flankers. It's big and heavy, but has an effective air brake and drag chutes. You can put the gear out at almost 700 kilometers an hour and the landing flaps up to about 580. The cockpit has 3 large MFDs, decent visibility in most directions, and a useful heads-up display. No HUD projected on the helmet sight, but that's basically my only gripe. Good cockpit, and I had a blast with it in VR. To close out on the Su-30SM. This plane has an enormous quantity of air-to-air missiles, the most in the game as of making this review. It's got a degree of super maneuverability, thanks in part to the thrust vectoring. It has a very strong set of sensors compared to most of the Soviet tech tree. And it's got an enormous selection and supply of air-to-ground weapons. However, it's still a heavy jet and it dumps energy fast in high AOA maneuvers, and its acceleration is only average towards the bottom end of the power curve. The final verdict on the Su-30SM is that this jet is very well suited to the top-tier meta, both in air battles and ground battles. If you like flankers, or if you like top-tier multi-role jets, get this plane. As always, thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, check out this other one.